In a previous video, I looked at mapping out basic shadow forms from this tower onto the ground. And while it will get the job done, I also wanted to at least address the more complex way and the more accurate way that you could do this. But if I go in and I put in all these lines on that basic video without kind of laying out at first just the simple form of what it would look like, it can be a little bit overwhelming. So in this one, I've gone in and I've mapped out to a greater degree the actual shape. Now, some of the things that I left out in the previous video was, for example, this corner where the light comes down and strikes this corner. I mostly just focused on this side, which would give a general sense in the correct direction. It would respect the light and everything, but it wouldn't quite show the shadow shape that this would create on a completely accurate and realistic scale. So what I've done is I have created lines that in red that go down from my light source that I've placed up here. I'm just assuming, based on the very general sense of lighting that I get from this image, that that would be an appropriate place to put it. I tried to use ambiguous and kind of neutral images that don't really suggest a strong light source, and that gives me some flexibility to choose my own, more or less. So I have taken from the light source the red lines that come down, and I've just kind of stretched them off the canvas. Then I've used the green lines to show me going straight down where that would fall on the actual ground plane. And then from my intersection of my light source, this red line that comes straight vertically down to the horizon line, I've run these along the bottom of the lines so that I can map out, based on the intersections of the red and the blue, what the actual shadow shape would be with respect to some of the changes to the shape, such as along the top of the ridges. And this, I admittedly did kind of hash it out quickly, so that doesn't feel completely accurate right there, but I'm probably in the ballpark with it, especially considering that I'm going to blur it. But it does give me this kind of expanded view of this corner as well, which was missing on the much more simplified one that I did on a previous video. Again, don't necessarily want to overwhelm too quickly. But now, if I take this and I begin mapping out the shadow shape, I'm going to get something that is a lot closer to how this would manifest in the real world. And one of the things I also wanted to see, this base comes down at a diagonal. I wanted to check that, but there wouldn't really be much shadow there. It would be very, very minimal. So I'm not going to worry too much about showing that. The height of this grass helps with that some too. So now if I fill this with color, with black, and then take all of my gridded elements here and remove them, I've got a much better sense of what the shadow would be if it was plotted accurately. But obviously it takes a little bit of time and it can be a little confusing to put down the horizon, to draw all the lines, to get everything mapped out. Well, it's easy to lose your place. That's why I kind of color coded them, and even then, it starts to hurt the eyes to stare at. You've got to spend significant time, significantly more even than I did here, in making sure everything is accurate. The caveat to that is that most people are not going to be able to tell at a glance whether or not it is accurate. They're going to get a general sense. So we have some flexibility in terms of not being perfect, and I think that's encouraging for one. So I'll go ahead and just very quickly do similar to what I did in the previous video and get this to a state of being generally accurate. Just by going in here with a texture brush. I have my Wacom now. That helps. When I was doing this on the previous video, I did not have the Wacom in my office. As it gets closer to me, I'll just make the brush a little bit bigger. And you can see that once I go in and add this effect, I'm also removing some of the detail. And again, that's where we have flexibility. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's not going to be a crisp shadow, because this isn't it casting a shadow on a city street. This is on a field of tall grass, which has its own distinct look. You can also see that when I applied the blur effect, which I'll point this out here in just a second, right here along the base of the tower, it created kind of this little glowing halo effect, so I would have to go back in and fill that back out. I'm going to try not using texture brush because that's not giving me the best results. Oh, and that's partially because I was not coloring with actual black. That would be why. Try not to make dumb mistakes like I do. And then of course when that shadow is cast, there would be additional shadow added here to the sides. This shadow will diffuse as it moves further away from the object. So I'll go in and add some of that natural diffusion that you would get. There would be shadow placed along this rear side of the building. I was just trying to color with an eraser. I've really got something going today with this inability to do basic things. And there would be some shadow on this side because I know that the object is turned just a little bit so that each part of it is away from the sun, it's facing away from the sun. But when I drop the opacity and then go in with an eraser, which I like to do to give some of the reflected light to provide just a little bit more of variation within it. That starts to give me that much more realistic look. It begins to feel like the light is actually affecting the image. And of course, one of the biggest things with working in photocompositing is being able to eventually, through the process of the composite, to go in and add sharpening effects, add curves layers, hue and saturation. I would definitely want to desaturate this background, which is very intense. I would probably use a curves layer at the top to do something like the, let's say, a vintage photo effect, increasing the blue on the lows, dropping it down on the highs so that you get kind of this aged photo. I might be taking it a little bit too far, but those types of things that bind an image together and make it feel like it's originally all one image. There's a couple of logical inconsistencies here, such as the fact that there's a huge stone at the base of this, which probably would not occur in the natural world in a field of grass. But little things like that we can get away with if we at least treat the light correctly. Light is the most important thing. And then along the base of my tower here, similar to what I did with the shadow, Let's go in and erase bits of it with a texture brush so that it feels like there's grass reaching up there. And that gives us our shadow. That gives us our sense of being in this environment. And I think that makes a tremendous difference when you are able to accurately plot the light, or even to basically put it together like I did in the previous video. It can still be very convincing.